So, David, so work and play. What are the steps for the people who are listening to us, listening to the replay? How do we get to being able to work and play like you? What are the first few steps, or what you would consider, just like how you helped your friend start their business? What are the first few things you would recommend people to have in order when starting a business
Well,
or an agency, however you want to take that?
yeah, well, I think an agency is a business. So the first step is really to start a business. And there's a difference between having a true legitimate business and putting up a shingle and saying, "Hey, I do this thing," right? Um, I am not a big believer in freelancers that go out and just sort of put up their hand and say, "Yeah, I can do this and I can do that." I think that to protect both yourself, your reputation, your business, and your clients and client base, that it's really important to have a true legitimate business. So, the steps are actually pretty simple. You need to create a business structure, meaning, for example, a company that's a corporation or an LLC. Um, I would not be a solopreneur. I would not want to be in a partnership. The reason, and I should say to begin with, I'm not an accountant. I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to give legal or accounting
Financial and
advice,
legal advice.
right? But yeah, exactly. But there are some things that I've learned along the way, and
Right.
so being an LLC gives you a lot of advantages over just being somebody with your hand up saying, "I can do this work." So one of the advantages that people don't think about too often is that you get the value of what's called a corporate veil. And the corporate veil protects you and you as a person and your individual assets, like if you own a house or a car, from ever being sued and taken away from you, as long as you haven't done anything illegal or fraudulent. But if you've made a mistake and the client gets all upset and makes all kinds of threats, well, they can threaten the company, but they can't threaten you. And so that corporate veil becomes very important. Um, you also need to go online to irs.gov and get an employee identification number. This is the thing we all hate to do because this is what allows them to tax us, but it's pretty important. And then the more difficult part is creating the if you're doing an LLC, the membership agreement. If it's just you, it's a lot easier. If you have a partner, you have to be thinking of things like, what happens when one partner wants to leave? How do they
Mm,
how do they get value out of their contribution, but not take everything away from the company because the other partner wants to continue, for example.
right.
Um, so having that document in place sets the rules, um, and those rules can be really important. As an example, when I started Software Support Group, it didn't take very long for us to grow to the point where I couldn't run a business and do sales and manage projects all at the same time. I
Right.
hired in a very long time friend, somebody who to me was the best salesman I have ever met in my life. And he was looking for a new job. I was looking for somebody who could sell. I told him I couldn't afford to pay him what he was worth, but I would make him a partner in the business. And so even though he and I had been friends since we were about 3 years old, um, and we are still friends, 60, what, 5 years later. Um, but one of the reasons we're friends is that part of our governance was that we had set up a structure of what happens if one of us wants to leave. After about 10 or 15 years, he had decided he'd had enough traveling around. I mean, he was traveling all over the world for our work. And he needed to be home. He needed to be with his wife, with his children that were growing. And we had created a structure that I was taught was called a Chinese auction. I'm not sure if that's, if other people have heard of that or not, but basically,
not at all.
The idea of a Chinese auction is that the person who wants to leave provides in writing what they want out of the business. So if they say, I want to leave and I think my shares are worth, $100.
Yeah.
They put that in writing and say, you other partners have to pay me $100 to get my membership shares to leave. But he doesn't know, that partner doesn't know if you're going to accept that or you're going to turn it on him and say, no, you have to buy my shares at your proposed price. And what this does is it keeps people kind of honest, right? If you don't know when you want to leave, when you want to dissolve the partnership, if you don't know if the amount per share that you're suggesting is what you have to pay or what you're going to receive, you tend to be a lot more realistic about it. And in our case, when he put that in writing, he was probably within 2 or 3% of what I thought it was worth, right? So we happened to be very close in terms of a dollar amount. We happened to be very close in terms of how he would leave, all of those things. And we finally had to put it, into a legal document. He got his attorney, I got my attorney, and I'll never forget this. Probably within 20 minutes, these two attorneys had us at each other's throats. They were just, everything that we had agreed to, they were throwing out. So finally, we asked the two attorneys to leave, and I said, Stu, here's what I want out of it. He said, well, here's what I want out of it. I said, well, what if we did it this way? Well, that works for me. Yeah, that works for me. In 15 minutes, we solved all of our problems because we had already had the governance set up. We both knew what to expect. So I think that's a very important part of the structure of your governance. And as a result,
when you mean structure of your governance, because I want to pause and let's break a couple things down here. And we also have, I know I mentioned we'll have like questions at the end, but I think there was a very contextualized question too, and it kind of is exactly how I want to break things down. Because so far we've talked about, let's actually set up a business. Let's not go freelancer. Let's make sure we have a structure in place to avoid liability, and also it can help you with taxes in those bullet points there. So I kind of want to go to that, and then also talk a little bit about because in this the situation that you're walking us through, you had some sort of partnership there. We had a question in the chat. It's pretty simple, but any individual can create a business, right? Just like you laid out for us. You can be an individual. You can go make a business today, and it's as simple as getting an EIN number. And I don't know all the steps that you had to do. I literally just go to Zen Business, and it just walks me through whatever. But just from your mouth, any individual can start a business today.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, if I don't know what kind of restrictions there might be if you're not a U.S. citizen or something like that, but that's what you get an attorney for.
Right.
So, anyways, you need the EIN, the business structure. With that, I live in the state of Ohio. Every state is slightly different, but in Ohio, the state, you create your business with the state. The state will send you your corporate papers. You take your EIN, your corporate papers, go to a bank, and the bank will now give you a corporate bank account. And with that, you are ready to go. You have the ability to pay bills. You have, assuming there's money there, but you have the ability to pay bills. You have the ability to receive money. You have a legal structure, and you have the ability to be taxed by the government. So now you have the minimum structure that you need to have a legitimate business. That piece that I was talking about that was missing is that corporate governance, which is something that an attorney would probably, could probably give somebody like a template for it. It kind of a template you can probably get online, and then you customize it to what is specific to you. And these elements are important no matter what your business is. The other thing that I found that I learned to be very important, and I do now, is to have a contract with that you can provide your clients. And
got you.
I actually have two contracts. I have one that we provide to mid-sized businesses that are a little more structured, a little larger, that is a much more comprehensive contract. And then I've got a 3-page contract for smaller businesses and individuals that we would build websites for that isn't quite as in depth. But but the value of the contract is that both people know the rules and you can refer to those rules. The way we structure our contracts is that we have a section in the contract that talks about the actual work we will be doing, and all it says is see Addendum A. Everything else in the contract are all the kind of legal things, who's going to, how are you going to get paid? How often do you get paid? What are your liabilities? What's your limitation of liabilities? In the larger contract, we talk about what an independent contractor, what constitutes an independent contractor, so that the client doesn't get stuck with issues of paying us and then the government coming back and saying, no, that wasn't really a contractor, that should have been an employee. So setting up those kinds of rules are really important. And we, even in both contracts, one of the important clauses is the responsibilities that the client has. Usually the contracts I've seen other agencies have, they talk about all of the agency responsibilities, but the customer has responsibilities also, right? So we have in there, for example, that because this has happened, where if the client doesn't respond to a request for assets or information or whatever within a certain time period, that the entire contract becomes due and payable. This forces them to respond. Now, there's all kinds of ways of modifying it. So you could say, well, if you don't do it within a certain time period or notify us that it'll take longer, I mean, you can make it reasonable. But I'm guessing most people who have done this work before realize that when the client asks us, how long will it take to get this project completed? The answer is always, whatever it is going to be about twice as much time, because you as a client aren't going to get us what we need when we need it. And it's almost always, when we tell somebody, oh, this will take us 2 weeks, it's a month and 2 weeks, because the client doesn't get us what they think they have. A lot of times client doesn't quite realize what they need. We'll ask them, do you have content that describes your company for the About Us section? Yeah, we have it. When they send it to us, it's 2 sentences, right? They don't understand what they need. So it's really important to have the limits on the client as to what their responsibilities are, as well as what your responsibilities are. Um, the addendum then is a separate document, and that's where we put in all of the project activities. So, you know, for example, how many pages? Or we actually use sections, not pages, but how many sections? What those sections are going to be? We're going to include Wix stores. We're going to exclude a payment plan that is not that does not come integrated into Wix, as an example. And in fact, I'm glad we have that in our contracts. We just built a website for an e-commerce company, and they wanted to use a product called Clover, which is their POS system and takes credit card processing. And they asked us, they said, well, it's really easy. Put the Clover button on. Well, it's not so easy. And it takes a lot of time to integrate it and test it. And when you talk about payments, you're talking about a lot of security. And we told them that would be an additional charge, and their response was, no, it should be part of it. I said, no, look at the contract. It says that we are only going to use credit card processors that are directly integrated into Wix. So it's as soon as they saw that, they said, oh yeah, you're right. That was the end of the discussion. And managing people's expectations is the hardest job for any of us to do, because we want, Brandon, we want the client to be happy, but at some point you have to say, I need to restrict the work also. So how do you keep that balance? And having a contract is a lot to keep that balance.
Yeah, so let's break that down, because so far we've talked about pretty much what tools and instruments and things do we need to have in order really to protect ourselves as business owners and as people who are doing this work, and also how to just keep people's expectations in check, and also, again, to defend yourself when there's an ask that is over what is in our contract, how to kind of like, hey, read, go back into the contract, this is not what was agreed upon. So I think, kind of to summarize everything that we've gone through so far, because we've gone through a lot, and I kind of want to dive back into some of it too, because a lot of it is a lot. And I feel like there's a lot of really good things that we can dive into each thing. So we also have Lee in the chat is asking some really good questions, and maybe we can fit in some of hers, but let's kind of go back through some of these things. So far, just to bullet point this, to summarize what we've gone through so far, is, again, I already mentioned this, how to protect ourselves and how to manage expectations, LLCs, EIN, or step one is making sure you have your LLC, your EIN, and also I think really just a banking account too. I think you mentioned this, but you didn't say it specifically, but making sure that you create another entity that is separate from you, that just does not, limited liability. Like, you just want to create a whole nother entity where you're totally separate from your personal expenses, taxable whatevers. And then
the law looks at, if you set up a legitimate business, the law looks at that business as a separate entity, like a separate person. Right? So you are able to kind of separate that business off from yourself. When you create an LLC, you also get as you had mentioned, tax advantages, right? So, for example, you own a car. That car costs you maintenance. It costs you a car payment monthly, insurance. Those things you can't deduct from your taxes. Yes. But your company can deduct them if you're using them for business. Your computer, you go out and buy, in our business, you want a fairly high level computer, costs whatever it costs you, and you pay for it. But if you're a business, you can depreciate it and deduct that. So a lot of expenses that you can't deduct as an individual, your company can deduct. And that can save you a lot of money. For those of us who our primary offices are our homes, you can deduct the cost of your mortgage, for example, a portion of it. The way we do it is we figure out the square footage of the house, how much space is being dedicated to office space, and get a percentage and deduct that percentage from our mortgage. It's wonderful to be able to take these deductions, and if if you're doing enough business, that all those deductions become greater than a standard deduction, and helps you save a lot of money.
Yeah, it's better than paying for something personally and getting taxed on the thing that you need for business. It's you said it best.